The following video is a Pokémon blog filmed in stereoscopic 3D. For best results, you may need to view the video using the internet browser called Firefox. A link to download Firefox can be found in the video description. Hi, my name is Zelgerath, and this is the first episode of Zelgerath's 3D Pokémon blog. Today, I will be talking about breaking news that occurred yesterday. They are the remakes of Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, and then I'm going to discuss some theories I have. Let's go! So the games are called Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and they're based on the games Ruby and Sapphire that originally came out in 2003 for the Game Boy Advance. They were the first two Pokemon games with relatively few glitches in them. And to this day, Pokemon that were caught in the games Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire can be sent forward all the way to X and Y. And so they're using the terms Alpha and Omega to differentiate themselves from the original Ruby and Sapphire. In the original Pokemon remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green, they used Fire and the Leaf to differentiate themselves from the originals. And those are Pokemon types. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, they used Heart and Soul to differentiate themselves from the original Gold and Silver, and those are both aspects of living beings. Alpha and Omega, they mean the beginning and the end. They are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. And now this is interesting. The first letter and the last letter. Where have we seen that before? Now, if you've played Pokemon X and Y, you might remember a character called Az. Literally, his name is A-Z. In Pokemon X and Y, I think they named him Az for thematic reasons, and I can't really discuss them fully without going into spoiler territory. But you might understand why I think he's called Az, if you've played the story. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire keep with the 6th generation trend of naming games after letters. Although X and Y are in the alphabet that we use, Alpha and Omega are in the Greek alphabet. What else do we have from Greek? Now, if you haven't heard this, you're going to hear it now. The actual term for the region in Generation 6 is kalos, which means beautiful, in Greek. So what does this all mean? What can we expect from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire? Yes, they will be remakes, but they're also going to add in new things that are related to Pokemon X and Y. More so than Heart Gold and Soul Silver were to the original Gold and Silver, and far more so than Fire Red and Leaf Green were to the original Red and Green. So, I wasn't too surprised about the announcement of these remakes, but I was a little bit caught off guard by the timing. I'm a little bit disappointed in myself for not having formally made a theory video for Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire remakes before the games were actually announced yesterday. I did mention them twice in my previous videos. Once in Quest for Kyogre Part 5, I think, and the other time in my instructional video on how to play a max lock, or max run as I called it at the time. I know that hindsight is 20/20, but the biggest reason I believed in the eventual existence of these remakes was some text found in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Feel free to check it out for yourself. If you go to the Cerulean City bike shop, the bike shop guy says the following. A long time ago, this cool boy rode my bike around, and that started this entire bike boom. Then I decided to open a branch at Goldenrod City, and they started selling like the wind. But no one comes to the shop anymore because of that. All I have left here is a bicycle pump. Should I start selling inflatable tubes? I identified that as an extended metaphor. He's talking about the Pokemon series. What he's saying is, when Pokemon Red and Green came out, they weren't popular right away, but once the people who started playing it started telling their friends, it got popular. And so they decided to make a sequel set in Johto, Gold and Silver. Noting the tendency for old games to be forgotten, and reminding us of all those swimmers in Hoenn that wouldn't stop talking about their inner tubes, he asks us a question. Should he supply those swimmers with inner tubes, setting the stage for the Hoenn games from a vague storyline point of view, Game Freak was asking us if they should make Ruby and Sapphire remakes. Well, Game Freak eventually did, and here we are talking about it. I wonder if the bike salesman will make an appearance on Slateport Beach. A similar detail was found in Fire Red and Leaf Green that set up the story for one aspect of Pokemon Gold and Silver and Heart Gold and Soul Silver. There was a computer in the Rocket Warehouse that had data on the ability to evolve a Pokemon using electromagnetic waves, which of course they did, which ended up making a red Gyarados and a whole lake full of Gyarados in the Lake of Rage. Seeing as this has become a pattern, I fully expect there to be some sort of hint for Diamond and Pearl remakes hidden in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, if, I repeat, if they intend on making Diamond and Pearl remakes. And they'll likely happen in either Generation 7, 8, or 9. Evidence that there would be a Ruby and Sapphire remake in Generation 6 included the fact that there is no visible nighttime in Kalos, which is important because that's also true of Hoenn, and the fact that Diamond and Pearl brought back the day and night cycle after not having one in Hoenn was evidence in support of a eventual Gold and Silver remake in Generation 4. And that theory ended up being true. Now, we should have paid attention to the fact that Black and White did have the day and night cycle as evidence against a Generation 3 remake in Generation 5. But I have to admit I was blind to that evidence. I was sure they were making Hoenn remakes for Generation 5, and they would give it to us after they gave us Gray version, which ended up being Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, and that confused me more than anything else ever could. But I digress. There are details to discuss, questions to answer, questions to ask that don't have answers yet, and I already have quite a number of theories about these two new remakes. First of all, the covers depict what look like Mega Kyogre and Mega Groudon. They may be Mega Evolutions, but they could also be alternate forms, like Shaman and Giratina have. Whether or not they're Mega Evolutions or alternate forms, it's still pretty interesting. I tend to believe that they are Mega Evolutions, seeing as Mewtwo did actually get Mega Evolutions, and he was a legendary Pokemon, and Professor Rowan seems to think that legendary Pokemon can't undergo any sort of Pokemon evolution, but he was already disproven once. He'll be disproven again with these two remakes. But we should seriously tell Professor Rowan about Mega Evolution. Mega Evolution or not, these two Pokemon are very interesting because they are not in the code for Pokemon X and Y. Recently, a hacker went through the game code of Pokemon X and Y, and he found a few things. And theoretically, he found all of the 3D models that were in the game cartridge at all. He found the 3 secret Pokemon at the end of the National Pokedex, Diancie being the first and the other 2 not being mentioned in this video. He found 2 additional patterns of the butterfly Pokemon Vivillon that are impossible to obtain no matter where you tell your 3DS you live. He found a flabebe relating to the story of Pokemon X and Y, and he found something that seems to be Mega Latios, but is called Mega Latios and Mega Latias. I am suspicious of that Mega Latias. Of course, there are 2 items, Latiosite, Latiasite, that work just like Mega Stones. They are Mega Stones. But Mega Latios and Mega Latias look exactly the same. They're both blue, and why would Latias, a red Pokemon, turn into a blue Pokemon unless they are supposed to form together in some story, but that's really not how the mechanic works. Seeing as Mega Latios and Latias have not been explained to us, I'd go as far as theorize that Mega Latias could be a decoy planted by Game Freak to confuse us even after someone hacked Pokemon X and Y. But that opens up the question, is a decoy even possible? Perhaps. Think about Mega Kyogre and Mega Groudon. They're not actually in the code for Pokemon X and Y, otherwise the hacker would have found it. So if it's not in the code for Pokemon X and Y, How could someone with the remake games battle someone from Pokemon X and Y if the person with the remake games has Mega Kyogre or Mega Groudon in their party? This has always been a problem ever since Fire Red and Leaf Green got alternate forms of Deexus that were different from the form of Deexus that was in Ruby and Sapphire. This time, the solution to this predicament will be simple. The answer is Mega Kyogre and Groudon are not in the game code for Pokemon X and Y. Yet. But they will be! Note that X and Y were the first Pokemon games that were able to receive patches onto the SD card associated with the game from online. So far, those patches have been used to fix glitches and change the way online interaction works. Now, I don't think it would be too crazy to believe that they'll release a patch that will allow Pokemon X and Y players to use the Pokemon that are new in the Hoenn remakes. By Pokemon, I mean the Mega Forms and, you know, the reasons besides nostalgia that we're going to get these games. I wouldn't be too surprised if a patch could change one Pokemon into another, maybe changing a texture or two. My bet is if there's going to be a Hoenn patch for Pokemon X and Y, it's probably going to be required in order to battle anyone who has the Hoenn remakes at all. Whether or not the person who has the Hoenn remakes are using Pokemon that are exclusive to the Hoenn remakes. The patch itself could be downloadable to Pokemon X and Y through the Nintendo Network or Spot Pass or something. But what if you don't have the internet? What if you're one of those people whose routers don't work? And for some reason they can't go to a McDonald's or something that has Wi-Fi? Here's when this gets interesting. There are precedents set by Game Freak that address this problem. In the original Ruby and Sapphire, there was a glitch that caused berries to stop growing after the battery in the cartridge dried up, and they were able to address this problem simply by having Ruby or Sapphire connect to the newer games or the Jirachi bonus disc. I'm not sure if it was a patch or a fix, but everything started working fine as soon as you connected to any of the games that came out after Ruby and Sapphire. Either way, they solved the problem game to game. Similarly, I believe that the Hoenn patch could be available via Spot Pass, as well as something like Street Pass, between a 3DS with X and Y and a 3DS with the Hoenn remakes. Basically, the 3DS with the Hoenn remakes would send some 3D models to the 3DS that has Pokemon X and Y. Do you remember the 3DS app called Pokedex 3D, the free version? It was basically a Pokedex for all of the Generation 5 Pokemon, but you didn't download them all from the internet at once. You were able to download up to 3 random Pokemon from Spot Pass every day. I read the Iwata Asks interview about the game, and the reason they did it that way was to limit the amount of time it took to download the game in the first place. 3D models can take a while to download, as anyone who has downloaded Pokédex 3D Pro will know. But the game actually let you download 3D models from each other, which ended up being faster than getting it from online. If you're an X and Y player who battles online, I'm pretty sure they're going to force you to download the Hoenn patch as soon as the games come out in order to continue playing online. But if you don't connect to the internet, the only time you'd really need the patch is if you are battling someone in real life who has the remakes. That's why I think the patch will be able to be distributable from the remakes themselves. So I'm sure that not knowing which Mega Evolutions will appear will add much excitement to the waiting period between now and when these Hoenn remakes come out, and when all their secrets are eventually discovered. I wouldn't be too surprised if we got Mega Rayquaza alongside the other two, and the Mega Hoenn starters alongside Mega Blaziken, as well as a permanent way to get blazikinites, latiosites, and latiasites, and all the other ites that are gonna be in these new games. The Mega Ring, of course, will be given to you probably by Professor Birch, or Steven, or someone else who works at the Devon Corporation. or a visitor from Kalos. You can't rule that out. The Devon Corporation will likely be an access point for the Dream World, seeing as there was a scientist in the original Ruby and Sapphire who was working on a way to see into the dreams of Pokemon. The Dream World hasn't existed at the same time as a remake coming out, so this will be the first time that the Dream World is implemented into a remake, if they do. My bet is that the flower shop north of the forest will probably have a Gracidea, which you can use to transform your shaman from land form into sky form. Deexis will probably change forms using the white rock that's just outside of the space shuttle. The space shuttle will probably do something that it hasn't done before, much like Celebi's Shrine did in the Generation 2 remakes for the Giovanni event and the Notched Ear Pichu event. I think that secret bases are going to use the 3DS's Street Pass feature if you choose to let it. And maybe, just maybe, we'll learn more about the Trick Master. So, if you're hyped for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, please share this video with anyone who will likely like this video. Speaking of that, feel free to like this video below. And if you want to motivate me, please leave a comment. Comments influence my future videos more than you might expect. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to PKMN Blogger too. Of course, that only applies if you haven't yet. Let me be the last person to say, hoennconfirmed! There was a similar detail found in Fire Red and Leaf Green, setting the stage. There was a... Go away. There was a similar detail in Fire Red and Leaf Green that pointed at the... Go away. Is it, would you be able to close most of that window? A bee wants to get in. Without disconnecting. A bees out here might get in if we don't close most of that window. Without disrupting the wire. Okay, that's good. Thank you.